Hold on to your seats, because this one is going to be explosive. Lord Dannatt, former Chief of the General Staff, has just dropped a bombshell on GB News. He thinks Brits should gladly accept tax hikes to boost defence spending. Yes, you heard that right. While families struggle with the cost of living, while hospitals crumble and potholes multiply like rabbits, we're being told to tighten our belts because the government must spend more on the military. And here's the kicker. He says it's more important than hospitals, roads, schools, and critical national infrastructure. Now, let's get one thing straight. This all ties into Prime Minister Keir Starmer's grand plan to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, likely by 2030. The government is even considering bringing that forward to 2028, which would mean pumping an extra £6 billion a year into the defence budget. And while they haven't confirmed exactly where the money is coming from, Lord Dannatt has no doubts. He's practically begging for higher taxes. Speaking to GB News, Dannatt declared that when times are tough, we all have to accept sacrifices. Oh, really? Because last time we checked, politicians weren't exactly struggling to pay their bills. They're not standing in food banks or getting crushed by soaring mortgage rates, are they? And yet, here they are, telling the British public that they should be happy to give up more of their hard-earned cash. And just in case you thought this was all a bit much, Dannatt made it crystal clear. He doesn't just support the tax rises, he practically welcomes them. Shock, horror. Let's do it, he said, as if taking even more money from struggling families was a mere formality. And just listen to his justification. He says we shouldn't be looking back at the financial mess the Tories left behind. Never mind the black hole in the budget, never mind the economic mismanagement. Just trust the government to spend wisely, because that's always worked so well, hasn't it? But here's where things get really interesting. He claims the situation today is entirely different from just a few months ago, so the government must act now. Why? Because according to him, national security is more important than anything else. Yes, even hospitals, roads and schools. Just let that sink in for a moment. While NHS waiting lists skyrocket and Britain's infrastructure falls apart, we're being told that our sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. And of course, this is all about Ukraine, because if there's one thing we've learned in the last few years, it's that there's always money for Ukraine, no matter what. Dannatt openly admits that a big part of this defence budget increase will go toward directly supporting Ukraine and boosting our own military capability. But here's the million-pound question. Why is the British taxpayer being forced to fund another country's war while our own people are struggling? And this isn't even really about Ukraine, is it? This is about setting the stage for Britain to ramp up military spending indefinitely, all under the guise of security. Today, it's Ukraine. Tomorrow, who knows? But one thing is certain, once taxes go up, they never come back down. And yet, Dannatt says we should all shoulder some of the burden. Convenient, isn't it? But let's not pretend this was some grand moment of honesty, because when the government wants something badly enough, they always find a way to frame it as our duty. How many times have we heard that sacrifices are needed for the greater good, whether it's net zero, whether it's war spending, whether it's bailing out the banks? And yet, somehow, it's always the public making the sacrifices, while the government throws billions around like monopoly money. And just to put the cherry on top, where was this "we must all shoulder the burden" talk when it came to helping struggling businesses, NHS workers, or even our own veterans? Where was the urgency then? Now, while Labour is busy planning tax hikes, they're also desperately scrambling to fix the chaos they've caused with their war on British farmers. Because let's not forget, their inheritance tax raid sent shockwaves through the farming community, and now they're backpedalling like mad. Their new master plan, a £5 billion peace offering to farmers, supposedly to make up for the damage they've already done. And just listen to the desperation in their pitch. They're promising that British farmers will now get a bigger share of public contracts, so that schools, prisons and hospitals will be encouraged to buy homegrown produce instead of importing cheap foreign goods. Sounds nice, right? But there's a catch, because legally, the government can't actually force public institutions to buy only British food. That would violate international trade laws. Instead, European farmers, yes, the very ones Labour loves so much, will also be in the running for these contracts. So, what does that mean? It means that while Labour is pretending to prioritise British farmers, they're actually setting up a system where EU growers could swoop in and claim a massive slice of the pie. And British farmers, they get crumbs. And let's not forget, this olive branch to farmers is coming right after Labour flat out rejected their proposed inheritance tax compromise. The NFU, the Tenant Farmers Association, and the Country Land and Business Association all came together with a solution, a clawback mechanism where death duties would only be paid if the land was sold within a certain period. And what did Labour do? They rejected it outright. Now, farms are shutting down at twice the rate they're opening, and Labour's response is too little, too late. But the political drama doesn't end there. Because while Labour is busy trying to repair its relationship with farmers, they're also facing a new and even bigger problem. Reform UK is on the rise. Yes, folks, Keir Starmer is terrified, and he's making that very clear with his latest attack on Reform UK. At the Scottish Labour conference, he went all in, calling Reform UK dangerous, pro-Putin, and even accusing them of betraying workers' rights. And what does that tell us? It tells us that Labour is feeling the heat. Former Tory advisor Lauren McAvat says Reform UK is becoming a real force in British politics, especially in Wales and Scotland. And here's the real shocker. Some polls even suggest they could overtake Labour in Wales. Yes, the same Labour Party that's dominated Wales for 25 years is now facing a serious challenge. And why is Reform UK gaining so much ground? Because Labour and the Tories have completely failed on the issues that matter most: immigration, jobs, and national identity. Reform is hitting them where it hurts, and Starmer knows it. But let's not pretend this attack on reform is really about policy. It's about desperation. Labour is losing control of the narrative, and now they're scrambling to paint Reform UK as some kind of boogeyman. But Nigel Farage isn't having any of it. He immediately hit back, calling Starmer's NHS claims completely false and slamming Labour's economic policies for destroying Scottish jobs. And he's got a point. More than 70,000 jobs linked to the North Sea have been wiped out thanks to net zero insanity. So, where does this leave us? With Labour raising taxes, British farmers betrayed, and Reform UK surging in the polls, the political landscape is shifting fast. The big question is, where will Britain be when the dust settles? And that's where you come in. Do you agree with Lord Dannatt? Should Brits really accept tax hikes for defence? Do you trust Labour's so-called support for farmers? And is Reform UK the real opposition now? Let me know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe and smash that like button. This story is developing fast, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.